When we think about how the franchise Assassin's Creed came to be, it's hard to ignore its roots in the Prince of Persia series. At its peak, Prince of Persia was a massively influential franchise. It started as a PC classic and later evolved into Ubisoft's popular Sands of Time trilogy. However, as the gaming industry moved forward, Prince of Persia struggled to maintain relevance, especially after multiple reboots. But what's fascinating is that this decline led to the birth of one of the biggest franchises in gaming, known as Assassin's Creed. No matter where you stand on the franchise right now, whether you like it, love it, or want it to die in a fire, its longevity is undeniable. As of right now, the franchise has 13 mainland games and an absurd amount of spin-offs and other media. The series has proven it's pretty big. This means there are of course numerous Ubisoft studios working on these games, with a large number of employees working behind the scenes, most of whom remain unrecognized by the general public. And to be honest, the way internet discourse is going on right now, that's probably for the best. But there was a time, especially during what people would consider Assassin's Creed's peak from 2007 to 2014, when the franchise had an outstanding lineup of talent shaping these games. People like Patrice Désilets, Corey May, Jade Raymond, Jeffrey Yohalem, Darby McDevitt, and many others who have not named. These individuals were the true masterminds behind the older games. Sadly, most of the names I've just mentioned are not around anymore. No, they haven't died, I think. But they've either left Ubisoft, been fired by Ubisoft, or moved on to pursue their own careers. So in this video, I want to give them the spotlight they don't usually get, highlight their contributions to Assassin's Creed, and explore where they are now. Just real quick before we dive into it, feel free to hit that subscribe button if you have not. You can also consider becoming a member of my Patreon to receive some pretty cool benefits such as early access to videos, behind the scenes, and a lot more. With that said, let's talk about the masterminds behind Assassin's Creed. When we talk about the origins of Assassin's Creed, and no, not Assassin's Creed Origins, but the very beginning of the franchise, Patrice Désilets is a name that cannot be overlooked. He's often regarded as the visionary behind the series. You see, Patrice Désilets brought a new approach to game design that shaped the franchise in ways that were revolutionary for the time. Before diving into Assassin's Creed though, let's talk a bit about Patrice himself and how he found his way to Ubisoft. Désilets was born in Quebec, Canada, and like many creative minds, he was a person that was drawn to film at first. He studied film at a university named Université de Québec et Montréal, and I just completely butchered that name. But in this university, this is where he cultivated a narrative-focused approach to storytelling. This background in film helped Désilets understand pacing, visual composition, and character development, all pretty important things that later translated into his work in video games. However, instead of sticking to the world of cinema, Patrice Désilets transitioned. And no, he didn't transform from a male to a female, but instead he transitioned from film to video games. And in 1997, he joined Ubisoft Montreal as a designer. Now his first big break came with the Prince of Persia Sands of Time. He was tasked with reinventing the franchise, which was no small feat. The game's parkour-inspired movement and very interesting storytelling were way ahead of its time. It introduced mechanics and a design philosophy that would lay the foundation for Assassin's Creed. You know, in many ways, Sands of Time was really just a prototype for Assassin's Creed, not only in its mechanics but also in its design ethos. Then came the opportunity to create a new franchise. Ubisoft wanted this brand new IP, something that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the giants of the gaming world. And there was Patrice Désilets, and he had an idea: a historical action game featuring a mysterious group of assassins. This idea was originally pitched as Prince of Persia Assassin, and eventually evolved into Assassin's Creed. With Désilets at the helm as creative director, Assassin's Creed took shape as a game that combined historical settings, an open world structure, and a philosophical story exploring free will versus control. When Assassin's Creed was released in 2007, it was immediately clear that this was something special. Patrice Désilets' direction gave the game a brand new tone. He pushed for the game to feature historical accuracy, which led to something called the Animus device. Now the Animus of course allowed you to relive historical events through the eyes of an assassin. His vision also included creating believable and intricate cityscapes like Damascus, Jerusalem, and Acre, where we could seamlessly parkour, leap between buildings, and interact with crowds. Désilets returned to direct Assassin's Creed 2, which to be honest remains one of the most beloved entries in the series. The game introduced Ezio Auditore, a character who would go on to become the face of the franchise for many people. Under Désilets' direction, Assassin's Creed 2 expanded on everything compared to the original, adding more to the story, refining the parkour, and making the world of Renaissance era Italy more interesting. He pushed for a more personal, emotional story, and Ezio's journey from a young man seeking revenge to a wise and seasoned assassin resonated deeply with many of us. But with all good things in life, it just had to get bad. You see, in 2010, everything changed. Patrice Désilets left Ubisoft in what can only be described as a dramatic departure. After creative differences and a desire for more autonomy, Désilets parted ways with the company that had been his creative home for years. He briefly joined THQ, hoping to develop new IPs, but when THQ went bankrupt in 2013, Ubisoft reacquired his new project 1666 Amsterdam, and with it, Patrice suddenly found himself back at Ubisoft. But it didn't last long. Soon after, he was fired from Ubisoft, despite being the very person that made Assassin's Creed, and his firing led to a legal battle over the rights to 1666 Amsterdam. Since then, Patrice Désilets has taken a different path. He founded his own studios, Panache Digital Games, where he's pursued his own creative projects, free from corporate oversight. His first game with the studio, which was Ancestors: The Humankind Odyssey, was a far cry from the brilliance of Assassin's Creed. It was a survival game set in prehistoric Africa, focusing on evolution, exploration, and survival instincts instead of story-heavy gameplay. So yeah, Patrice Désilets may no longer be associated with Assassin's Creed, but in reality, without him, Assassin's Creed would not exist, plain and simple. Alright, so instead of talking about each of these two people individually, I figured I'd group them together as they share a lot of similarities. And those two are Corey May and Jeffrey Yohalem. They were the architects of some of the series' most impactful and unforgettable moments. Corey and Jeffrey worked together on several games, bouncing off each other's ideas, and is basically the reason why the older games had all those modern conspiracies like Adolf Hitler, Gandhi, and so on. Pretty much a lore that a lot of us still talk about to this day. In fact, check out this video going over it if you're interested. Now, starting with Corey May. The guy's background is kind of a story in itself. He went to Harvard, he studied film, and then went on to the University of Southern California's producing program. Basically, he was all set up for a career in Hollywood. But instead of making movies, he found his way into video games, and Ubisoft very quickly realized that they had something special with him. Before Assassin's Creed, he worked on Prince of Persia: Warrior Within and The Two Thrones, both of which are games with very detailed, almost philosophical storytelling. You see, that experience he had was key, because it let Corey May experiment with the kind of layered stories he'd soon bring to Assassin's Creed. When Ubisoft tapped Corey to help create Assassin's Creed, he went all in. From the start, Corey was the guy crafting the lore, building the foundation for the whole series. Templars, Assassins, Pieces of Eden, the Animus, all of it was Corey's playground, and he took it seriously. He wanted it to make his players think, question things, and feel something real. That's why the modern day conspiracies that we saw in Assassin's Creed 2 shit me up as a kid, because I did not know the difference between fiction and reality, and it's all thanks to Corey May's writing. Enter Jeffrey Yohalem. He graduated from Yale University with a degree in English literature. He came into Assassin's Creed a bit later, but when he joined, he brought a perspective that meshed perfectly with Corey's work. While Corey May was the guy for all those big philosophical ideas, Jeffrey had this special thing for injecting the characters and moments in the older AC games with raw emotion. Together, they were like a kind of dream team in terms of storytelling. Jeffrey understood that if you did not care about the characters, then the story was not going to hit as hard, and that's where he excelled. The two first teamed up on Assassin's Creed 2, and that game's story was a turning point for the franchise. These two writers made Ezio feel like somebody you could root for, someone who grew from his mistakes, and someone whose victories and losses felt personal. And then came Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Corey May and Jeffrey Yohalem went even deeper here, developing Ezio as a leader and exploring the responsibilities that came with wielding power. Jeffrey's influence really showed in Brotherhood's script. He knew how to make those intense moments feel grounded. Then there was Assassin's Creed 3, which Corey wrote, while Jeffrey handled Assassin's Creed Revelations as just a writer. Of course, a man named Darby McDevitt was the lead writer for that game. I'll talk more about him later on. Anyway, with Assassin's Creed 3, Corey May took on a new kind of hero, Connor Kenway, a Native American assassin with a completely different perspective on everything compared to the previous games. It was a darker, more intense story that touched on America's complicated past. Meanwhile, Jeffrey's work on Assassin's Creed Revelations was like giving Ezio a proper send-off. Revelations wrapped up Ezio's arc beautifully, and it brought in Altair's legacy as well, combining two legendary characters into one storyline. Corey's influence did not just stop there. He stayed with the franchise for years, consulting on Assassin's Creed Black Flag as a script consultant. Later, in Assassin's Creed Syndicate, while Jeffrey Yohalem took the lead as the game's lead writer, Corey May stepped into the role of narrative director, overseeing the story's broader direction. Oh, and one more thing about Jeffrey Yohalem. He also sneakily contributed additional dialogue and crafted the Dead Kings DLC for Assassin's Creed Unity. So where are they now? Well, Corey May's time at Ubisoft eventually came to an end, like so many other of the OG employees. He left around 2015, and since then, he's been working in different studios, exploring new projects and games. He's one of those people who, once you know his work, you see his fingerprints on every game he's touched. Whereas with Jeffrey Yohalem, he's surprisingly still at Ubisoft working away in the background. You know, his last known piece of work was the narrative director and lead writer of Immortals Phoenix Rising, a game that I thought was pretty underrated and deserves a lot more attention. So he is still a great writer. Darby McDevitt. A name that most Assassin's Creed fans are familiar with, especially when you compare him to the other names in the video. It's Darby McDevitt that seems to be more well known. Now, he's somebody that is a perfectionist when it comes to storytelling and the emotional side of the franchise. His career with Ubisoft started way back in 2009, initially working on smaller projects like Assassin's Creed 2 Discovery and Assassin's Creed Bloodlines. But one project that stood out was Embers. Now, Embers was a short film that serves as a touchy conclusion to Ezio Auditore's story. It gave us a final glimpse of Ezio in his older years, living a peaceful life in Florence after years of hardship and loss. This project especially demonstrated Darby's specialty for bringing emotional depth to characters and giving fans closure for one of the franchise's most beloved protagonists. However, it was not until Assassin's Creed Revelations in 2011 that he really got his big break as a lead writer, and from here his influence on the franchise just kept growing. For a lot of us, Assassin's Creed Revelations is iconic because it provided a touching, satisfying end to Ezio's journey. Well, the game that is. Of course, as I said, Embers was the true conclusion. You know, stuff like Ezio's dialogue to Desmond, it's Darby's writing that made it feel genuine and emotional. It's one of those moments that a lot of us hold close, because we remember the writing back then. Then there's Assassin's Creed Black Flag, a game that really showed Darby's vision for adventure. This is the game where he took Edward Kenway, a pirate, a rogue, and a man who did not care much for the Assassin Templar conflict, and made us root for him. In Unity, Darby was involved as a co-writer, but he's mentioned that he wished he could have done more with the modern day story. He's a huge fan of the modern day lore, which is not surprising given his ideas for tying the present with the past. You can see his hand in the way he works in bits of ezio lore and builds on the grander mythology of the series. In fact, here's a fun fact. He has created so much ezio lore that apparently he and the Assassin's Creed narrative team have 500 to 700 years of ezio history ready to go, something only a truly dedicated storyteller could come up with. Now, after Assassin's Creed Unity, he briefly left the franchise to work on other projects, but returned in 2020 as the narrative director for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Now, Valhalla was ambitious, and it was full of lore that fans of Darby's writing loved. I won't give my opinion on Valhalla, as that's irrelevant for this type of video, but just know that Darby McDevitt was the man responsible for Layla Hassan's storyline, and also giving that closure in a way that left us with more questions than answers. Darby's approach to storytelling in Assassin's Creed is distinctive, because he does not just focus on the protagonist, but also on the entire universe around them. He's even said that he writes these characters as if they're real people, complex, flawed and driven by their beliefs. His return to Ubisoft just after leaving had many people celebrating, because it meant that he was not done with Assassin's Creed just yet. And now, with him reportedly working on Assassin's Creed Hexe, which is the next Assassin's Creed game after Shadows, it's pretty hopeful to be eager and see what he brings to the table. Jade Raymond is a name synonymous with Assassin's Creed's early success. Born in Montreal on August 28, 1975, Jade's path to the gaming industry was driven by her passion for technology. She graduated from St. George's School of Montreal in 1992, then Marianopolis College in 1994, before going on to earn a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from McGill University in 1998. After graduating from that university, she got her first gig as a programmer at Sony, where she helped build their first research and development group. But her career really took off when she moved to Electronic Arts, or EA, and worked on The Sims Online. That experience set the stage for her next big move, joining Ubisoft Montreal in 2004. Now, at Ubisoft, Jade Raymond made her mark by leading the creation of the very first Assassin's Creed game. As the executive producer, she guided the team in building the open world structure and historical depth that set Assassin's Creed apart. She stayed on as executive producer for Assassin's Creed 2, and even worked on Assassin's Creed Bloodlines on the PSP. Her hands-on approach helped shape Assassin's Creed into the cultural phenomenon it became, turning it into one of Ubisoft's biggest hits. In fact, it probably is Ubisoft's biggest hit. In 2010, she moved to Toronto to establish Ubisoft Toronto as the studio's managing director, overseeing projects like Assassin's Creed Unity, which is one of the most ambitious games in the series. But Jade Raymond did not stop with Assassin's Creed. She also produced the first Watch Dogs game, showing her range and willingness to dive into new IPs. After Ubisoft, she went on to EA, where she started Motive Studio and collaborated on Star Wars projects with industry legend Amy Hennig. In 2019, she joined Google to lead Stadia Games, Google's biggest bet on cloud gaming, but Stadia did not pan out. She was pretty much unfazed and kept pushing forward, and in 2021 launched Haven Studios with Sony backing her up to create an original IP for the PlayStation PlayStation. Sony was so impressed that they acquired Haven Studios in 2022, bringing her team into the PlayStation family. Beyond making games, Jade Raymond has been an advocate for women in gaming, serving on the board of Women in Film and Television International and the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences. Her career has been nothing short of groundbreaking, and she's left a lasting impact on every project she's touched. Now, last but not least, I want to also give this spotlight to somebody that is not a developer or a writer or anything like that, but instead a composer. Now, we all know Assassin's Creed soundtracks from the first game to the latest game are straight up always hits, and that is thanks to many composers. They're all incredible, but the one composer I want to highlight specifically for this video is Jesper Kyd. Starting with the original Assassin's Creed, he brought a very unique sound that captured the spiritual, mysterious vibe of Altair's journey. You know, I don't know if it's just me, but there's something haunting about the first game's music. It's kind of like this mix of ancient and modern, perfectly mirroring the game's time-bending concept of experiencing history through the animus. But Jesper Kyd really came into his own with Assassin's Creed 2, when the series moved into Renaissance Italy with Ezio. He managed to give us a soundtrack that feels adventurous, emotional, and just straight up 10 out of 10 all at once. Tracks like Ezio's Family have become iconic. That track especially quite literally elevates the franchise as a whole, because it is in every Assassin's Creed game at this point. With Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Jesper Kyd kept building on that foundation. This time he gave the music a slight darker edge, reflecting the powerful and dangerous Borgia family that Ezio faces. He introduced more intense, almost menacing tones in tracks like Master Assassin and City of Rome. These pieces help bring out the gritty side of Ezio's life, showing a man who's matured and is now leading his brotherhood against a dangerous enemy. Then came Assassin's Creed Revelations, where he shared composing duties with Lorne Balfe. This game was about closure for Ezio, and Jesper Kyd's music reflected that. There's a sense of melancholy implemented throughout the soundtrack, like in the track called The Wounded Eagle, as Ezio embarks on his final journey, hoping to understand more about his life's purpose. After Revelations, Jesper Kyd took a big break from the series, but he made a return with Assassin's Creed Valhalla way later. This time, alongside composers Sarah Sachner and Einar Selvik, Jesper Kyd brought the sounds of Norse mythology and Viking culture to life. It's definitely different from his earlier work, but it still has that signature touch. I've never been the biggest fan of the game, but I will always appreciate a good soundtrack, and Valhalla definitely delivered in that regard. Tracks like Out of the North capture the wild, untamed spirit of Ava's world, while also carrying a hint of the mysticism that Jesper Kyd is known for. Even though Valhalla's soundtrack had a team of composers, it felt like you could hear Jesper Kyd's presence alone. Right now, it's unclear if Jesper Kyd will be back for any future Assassin's Creed games, because The Flight is responsible for Assassin's Creed Shadow's soundtrack. Maybe we'll see Jesper Kyd return for Hex, who knows? So there we have it. This video was more of an appreciated video for the OG Assassin's Creed employees, writers and developers, because they definitely deserve it. Without them, Assassin's Creed would cease to exist. They laid the groundwork for the future Assassin's Creed games. Now, it's up to the current lead writers, script writers and so on to deliver something that is memorable. Will they? I have no idea, but here's to hoping, I guess. As always, shout out to the members of my Patreon, and with that said, I'll see you in the next one.